Qualitative research, phenomena in a real-world setting. Look at the word. Qualitative means quality, not quantity, not numerical things, but it's a qualitative format of research. In qualitative research, we're dealing with phenomena in a real-world setting. So you're looking at how things are really going on around you, and you're evaluating that without necessarily setting up a scenario, but rather you're evaluating or investigating the real world around you. It may involve capturing and studying the complexity of the phenomenon. So you observe a phenomenon, you want to understand how the phenomenon works, you go out, you investigate it, you capture, you study it. And when you do it, you have a lot of complexity. So you really aren't adjusting the variables. You're looking at everything, and then you're trying to figure out how the variables fit in. It may not be simplifiable. So you're looking at big picture things and maybe not little individual pictures. You may need to look at multiple perspectives because you've got a lot of different things going on. And when you've got a lot of different things going on, you've got to be able to tell which is which, and then you figure out how these things interact and what happens from there. In qualitative research, we ask open-ended questions. We aren't looking at something that's closed-end, but rather we're looking at an open-ended question, and as we ask an open-ended question, you gather information, then you try and take that information and you condense it down and study and understand where things are coming from. Here's the caveat. It requires considerable preparation when you are doing it. So it could take a lot of work getting to the point where you actually go out and do the research, and then you've got even more work trying to figure out what your research means. Considerable planning when you're doing this. Considerable organization. If you are trying to figure out who's going to get elected this year as president, think of the number of people you've got to get out there and contact. Think of how many people you've got to be able to go and deal with. And you've got to be able to look at this in each state so that you can ask the proper questions, so that you can get the proper information. Then based on that, you can go back and you can do your electoral college concept. And hey, it's organization all over the place. So you have to be organized in here. Process. You're looking at descriptive material. Not necessarily numeric material, but descriptive material. You're looking at how do I interpret the information that I gather? So therefore, the information you gather has to be targeted. We're looking at verification. How could you verify that the information you got is actually valid? I'm not going to say correct. I'm going to say valid. Because if you go out there and you do a survey or something like that, you're getting information. It may not be correct, but you need to verify that it's actually valid. Then how do you go out there and evaluate what you've got? I mean, you could be looking at a rather large data set, which means you've got to be able to break it down into smaller units. Now, the types of research we do, case studies. If you want to do a case study, you go out there and you look at specific things and you take a case and you try and break it down and you figure out what is going on with it so that you can get an answer from it. Case studies, therefore, become very interesting. You could look at ethnographic, which is the scientific study of individuals and their cultures. So when you look at a certain population of people, what do they do and how is that important? Now, again, you're not controlling variables, but what you're doing is you're gathering information that you've got and you're looking at that information, trying to come up with some answers. Phenomenological study. You're studying different phenomenon. And when you're looking at the different phenomenon, you're trying to figure out how these interrelate and where you could get something out of it. I always enjoy watching the shows where they're trying to prove the existence of ghosts and they're investigating phenomenon. And it becomes very interesting because they come up with all of these different types of material and they're trying to figure out, are there temperature changes? Are there this? Are there that? Are there magnetic variances? And it becomes very interesting in what they're doing. But again, it is a qualitative type research. A grounded theory is where you do one of these qualitative type studies to gather information. And then based on that information, you create this theory that is based on the qualitative study. It's not the same thing as a scientific theory, but rather it's you observed all this material, you've got these information coming in, and then based on that, you're going to come up with a theory as to what's going on. We've got content analysis, where you analyze different contents and you try and make sense out of the different types of content you've got in there. You may look at a place and try and determine why one place votes for one particular candidate and one place votes for another. You might look at a university and you might look at the diversity in one university and compare it to a different one. So in there, you're looking at a content sort of thing. Now, how do we collect data? Key part, right of informed consent. You're dealing with people, and when you're dealing with people, they need to know what you're doing for or to them. So they have a right to know. I got a thing where they want me to participate in a particular study for 4 years, taking a certain kind of material and multivitamins. They have to let me know exactly what's going on here in order to be able to do the study so they can get my participation in. They say I could either get a vitamin or a placebo, but I won't know which is which. So it's a right of informed consent. You have to be informed of what's going on. They got to tell you about the pros and cons of the situation. What might happen? What's the good stuff? What's the bad stuff? And as they do this, it becomes very interesting because you've got to be able to make a decision on it. You have a right to privacy. You have to know what's going to happen to the material. Interestingly, this particular communication I got was a communication to me, but it had a number on it. So it would seem that whenever they need to communicate with me, they just send me something and they label it with that number and it gets to me, but nobody knows who I am. And only in the very end may somebody even find out. Right to privacy says you've got the right to be left alone. Telemarketers call up all the time. They want information. I don't have to give it to them. It's my right to privacy. How are we going to collect data? A lot of different sampling methods. And the question always comes down to how big a sample do you need? Who are you going to sample? We could do it based on observations. So you could go out, and I saw this several years ago. They had a study where they posted people around campus. And what they were doing is they were checking the cars that went by, determining total number of cars and total number of cars with the driver wearing a seatbelt. And based on that, they were getting some sort of information. But it was based totally on observation. They didn't ask anybody. They were checking it out. You could do interviews. It's not uncommon to go out there and collect data by interviewing people. You may want to know the biking habits of people on the St. Mark's Trail. So all of a sudden you go out there and you figure out where they're at and you talk to them and find out what's going on with them. Again, this would be interviews. Considerations that we look at. Whenever you're doing this, you have to identify the questions in advance. You have to know what you're going to ask ahead of time. And you have to make sure that it's going to provide relevant answers. Consideration. How will cultural backgrounds influence responses? If you're looking at the number of people biking on the St. Mark's Trail, that might have a cultural bias to it because not everybody in all different cultures are going to get out there and ride a bicycle down the trail. If you're doing a study at a museum, you have to look at how much the museum costs to get in. That could have a cultural bias in it. So we need to look at that. How big a representation of a group do you have? How representative is your group? Are they actually going to tell you the proper information, or are they going to try and pull some snow over your eyes? When you do it, you have to have a suitable location so that you can gather the information that you're really looking for. Sometimes you need to obtain written permission. You may need to obtain written permission from the property owner. You may need to obtain written permission from somebody to be able to do such a type of thing. You may need to, we had one where we wanted to plant plants in an area so that we could verify what was happening on a competition type study. And we were going to do it under a right of way. And we had to go get the owner of the right of way to allow us to use that particular spot. So sometimes you have to obtain written permission in what you're doing. Sometimes you have to establish rapport. You walk up to people and you start asking them questions. Depending on the question you ask, they may look at you and walk away, or they may say something really nasty. You never know. But one of the things you want to do is you want to establish a rapport with them before you get in and actually start asking these heavy-duty questions. Other considerations. Focus on the actual. Focus on what's going right now. Focus on the specific thing you want to find out about, and don't deviate from it. Here's a tough one. Don't put words in people's mouths. You ask them a question, let them answer the question. Don't answer the question for them. Don't give them certain options for it, because when you give them certain options, they may not be able to answer it properly, or you may distort the sort of answer that you're going to receive. So when you do it, don't put words in people's mouths. Record everything. If you have got a verbatim recording, you can go back and check it later. If you don't, you may not know what actually occurred, and then you may be stuck with some sort of answer that you're not necessarily sure of. You want to record everything verbatim. Don't respond to an answer. If you get an answer that was not one that you expected, you might ask for clarification, but don't respond to it. Don't raise your eyebrows, don't smile, don't smirk, because doing that could influence the way the person answers their questions. You have to remember that responses may not be factual. You ask somebody, how much money do they make? And either they're not going to tell you, or they're probably going to lie. So you have to remember that some of these things need to be taken with a little grain of salt to be able to figure out exactly where it is. If you use focus groups, watch out for group dynamics, which means, do you have somebody in the focus group that controls things? And if you do, that could modify the way things are going in here. So we always look for things like that. How do you deal with the data? You got to be able to organize it. And sometimes that may be a rather large challenge because it may not be straightforward material. You may need to go through the data set many different times, looking for abnormalities or looking for subsets that you weren't expecting. You need to process that. You need to identify general categories or themes that you would be dealing with respect to these particular data sets that you're getting. And you need to be able to integrate and summarize what you're getting out of it. Remember, we're talking about generalizations. If you're looking at a qualitative type test, you aren't going to get specific numbers that you can fill into a little table and run statistics on it and say, boom, this is it. You're going to get something that's going to take a lot of work to be able to figure out exactly what's going on. So overall, qualitative research, very unique, very different. Many times it's done in social sciences and things like that, and it may not be something that we're dealing with in the life sciences. But if you're doing something in economics, you may be dealing with some of this qualitative type data.